of her request was to get you backstage or something? Should we slip that?
Let's try for after. Thank you.
Let me get my Hi, everybody. Thank you for being in this dark room on this very sunny day. I'm Jessica Strand, the Director of Public Programs at the Library Foundation of Los Angeles. And before we begin today's program, in the spirit of reconciliation, the Los Angeles Public Library recognizes and acknowledges the first peoples of this land. We pay our respect to their elders, past and present, and extend that respect to all Indigenous peoples today. I have to do this patter, but You'll understand. For those not familiar with the Library Foundation of Los Angeles, we are a private, nonprofit organization devoted to fundraising, advocacy, and innovative programming in support of the Los Angeles Public Library. Thank you to the many members who might be here in the audience. And if you're not a member, I hope that you will consider joining LFLA to continue to see more programs like this one and to support critical library services and initiatives to teens, children, and adults all over Los Angeles. Our spring programming ends this Tuesday at 7 with the fascinating primatologist Franz de Waal discussing his findings in his book, Different, Gender Through the Eyes of a Primatologist. Please check out Aloud and see in the next 2 weeks our summer programming. So without further ado, for today's timely and important program with Reza Aslan, Franklin Leonard, and Jean Guerrero. We're honored and really privileged to be co-hosting this event with PEN America for their World Voices Festival, and to introduce today's guests and to say more about the PEN Festival, World Voices Festival, I want to welcome PEN's Managing Director on the West Coast, Allison Lee. Thank you very much.
Good afternoon. As just said, I'm Allison Lee, and I'm the Managing Director for PEN America out here in California, an organization whose mission is to unite writers and allies to celebrate the power of the written word and champion the freedom to write. The PEN World Voices Festival, which this is a part of, was founded in 2005 by Salman Rushdie, Michael Roberts, and Esther Allen, in a time of great turmoil and division in the United States. Over the last 18 years, the festival has stayed true to its original mission, to celebrate the power of storytelling and literature and translation, and to convene global voices across borders, languages, and culture. Over the last tumultuous years, many of us have turned to books in search of solidarity in moments of uncertainty, as well as in search of inspiration and much-needed joy. This week, both here in Los Angeles and in New York, we are honored to convene some of the world's greatest writers, thinkers, and artists to join us in the international dialogue as we imagine our way forward. Some of you may know PEN America for our advocacy work against book bans and educational censorship. Indeed, over the last 2 years, PEN America has tracked an alarming rise in book bans across the United States, and our Freedom to Write Index tracked the cases of over 300 writers who were detained or imprisoned around the world for their writing or for exercising their freedom of expression in 2022. The conversation we are gathered to have here today is a potent reminder of the power of literature and thought and the way in which stories allow us to imagine new futures. Now is the time to be louder together and to defend the freedom to write, read, and speak at home and across the globe. For those of you who are new to PEN America, we are a member-driven organization. We have offices here in Los Angeles, in New York, and Washington, D.C., and we have members in every U.S. state and chapter cities across the country, from Detroit to Tulsa to Birmingham to Miami. We welcome all of you to become a member today and join us in bringing our mission to life. Please stop by the information table in the lobby to learn more about becoming a member. We thank our members, our presenting sponsor, Aloud, and the Los Angeles Public Library and the Library Foundation of Los Angeles, and our bookstore partner, the Library Store, for helping us share our author's wonderful work with you today. Now, I'm especially pleased to introduce today's event, Writer-Scholar Target, Online Harassment and the Threat to Free Expression, and our speakers, Reza Aslan, Jean Guerrero, and Franklin Leonard, for a timely and vital conversation on the insidious impact of online antagonism and harassment on the work of writers, scholars, and creators. Reza Aslan is a renowned writer, commentator, professor, Emmy and Peabody-nominated producer, and scholar of religions. A recipient of the prestigious James Joyce Award, Aslan is the author of 3 internationally selling best-selling books. His producing credits include the acclaimed HBO series The Leftovers and CBS comedy United States of AI. Al? Yeah, I was like, AI would have been ahead of its time. So that wasn't right. United States of Al. But maybe that's the next project, so that's a thought, right? Jean Guerrero is a columnist at the Los Angeles Times. She is the author of HATEMONGER, Stephen Miller, Donald Trump, and the White Nationalist Agenda. Her first book, CRUX, a cross-border memoir, won a PEN Literary Award and was named one of NPR's best books of 2019. While working at KPBS as an investigative border reporter, she won an Emmy, contributed to NPR, the PBS NewsHour, and more. Franklin Leonard is a film and television producer, cultural commentator, and entrepreneur. He is the founder and CEO of The Blacklist, the company that celebrates and supports great screenwriters and the writers who do it. More than 400 scripts from the annual Blacklist survey have been produced as featured films, earning more than 250 Academy Award nominations and 50 wins. Thank you all for coming today, and thank you to our guests for agreeing to take part in what promises to be a wonderful event. Please join me in welcoming them to the stage.
Hello. Do you want your water on that side?
Yeah, I'll put it on the floor.
Hi. That's my daughter. She has a lot to say.
So great to see everybody. Thank you all for coming out. It's very exciting to have Reza and Franklin here with us. And I figured I would just jump right in to talking about the theme of this conversation, the online harassment and threat to free expression that so many writers face here and across the world. So all of us here on this stage have been on the receiving end of hate mail, of social media harassment campaigns, people fantasizing about our deaths, and even death threats. So I was thinking we could start by sharing some of what we've experienced and what we learned from it. Reza, do you think we can start with you? I mean, you recently had death threats that disrupted your book tour. Can you share what happened?
That's right. My book tour kind of began not long after the current unrest in Iran. My book also has a lot to do with Iranian history, and it tells the story of this 22-year-old Christian missionary from Nebraska who in 1907 went to Iran in order to preach the gospel and ended up arriving in the middle of a revolution, the first democratic revolution in the Middle East, and then eventually gives up his missionary post and his American citizenship and joins the revolution, and then dies this kind of spectacularly heroic death. And to this day, he's still considered a martyr and a hero in Iran. And so, you know, on the one hand, I thought that it would be like perfect timing to go out with this book because it was so relevant to what was going on in the world right now, and everyone's attention was on the uprising in Iran. But unfortunately, what happened is that a very concerted, very well-funded, and I think very well-coordinated campaign of disinformation began to circulate through social media and through the web, in which I and every other progressive Iranian American voice in the United States was being framed as an apologist for the Islamic Republic, for the regime. And that campaign resulted in capturing the imagination of, I think, many, many well-meaning, particularly young Iranian Americans, a lot of young people who really felt as though there was nothing that they could do, that they were watching these horrific scenes of violence, from the state against these innocent young men and women who were asking for nothing more than the most basic of human rights, the ability to have a say in the decisions that ruled their lives. It's not a big ask. And I think feeling very powerless to do anything about it and looking for someone to blame for it very easily fell for this disinformation campaign. But the flip side of that was that the people who were spreading this message, as we know now through a few months of actual analysis of where this messaging was coming from, and it's become very clear that this messaging originated in the darkest corners of the web with troll farms and anonymous social media posts that had as their source essentially three kind of major places, one of which was the right wing in Israel. In fact, a huge amount of the attacks, the social media attacks on progressive Iranian American voices was coming from a single Israeli advertising agency. And then, of course, we know that the State Department itself had a troll farm called the Iran Disinfo office, which apparently was closed down a couple of years ago, but not before, also tarring a lot of Iranian American voices as sort of in bed with the regime. And then there was, a number of organizations that probably had their source in Saudi Arabia, which is also another country that has a vested interest in silencing any progressive Iranian American voice and instead elevating those voices that are clamoring for a robust military response. So all of this created a situation where those of us who are sort of prominent voices talking about change in Iran, but through non-military means, were inundated with the most horrific and well-coordinated attacks. And I just happened to be in the middle of a 6-week book tour when all of this started. So everywhere I went, there were, what's funny is the truth is that mostly it was threats. Only a couple of times did people actually show up to events. And those times were actually quite wonderful because if you know anything about me, you know that I don't have a problem with that. And so there was great conversations.
Most of it was emailed threats, you mean?
Most of it was emailed threats, yeah. But what I found shocking was just how many venues caved to those email threats. And I mean venues that I've spoken at numerous times before. I mean universities, Stanford University, which, calls itself a bastion of free speech, canceled the venues. Here at Mark Taper Forum, I'm sorry, not at Mark Taper Forum, I apologize, the Wallace Annenberg Center. We had a massive event that was supposed to be part of the sort of solidarity with Iran, star-studded event with all kinds of different voices. That one had to be shut down because of threats, not just to me, but to the other people who were taking part in it. So, as I've kind of mentioned before, is that it's not like I am not used to threats on my life. When you write about religion and politics for a living, you are going to be threatened.
But these were different.
These were different because I don't have a problem getting threats based on things that I've said. These are threats for things that I've never said or thought. And that was a new experience for me.
Wow. That's incredible. And Franklin, your work on the blacklist unexpectedly resulted in you being attacked by a QAnon mob.
Yeah.
Can you tell us?
I love this story.
Didn't see it coming. Yeah, I mean, look, the short version of the story is that I'm not really a proper writer. In fact, they were giving me a hard time for not having written a book yet. But I work with writers, and I'm very vocal on Twitter and in editorial pages about sort of my point of view, some of which often involves writing. But yeah, I spend probably too much time on Twitter, and a couple of years ago, I realized that, some of my more nonsensical and non-politically charged tweets were resulting in responses that were very charged and ominous, and had a lot of hashtags that I just didn't recognize that they were all sort of nonsense hashtags, and this sort of kept happening more and more. And eventually I sort of realized that they all sort of led back to a blogger who called himself Neon Revolt, who was like a big part, like one of the leading QAnon voices. And every 6 months or so, he would write a 5,000 to 7,000 word essay. Basically, I mean, the first one was that I was George Soros's rent boy in Hollywood. And I had a lot of photos.
You wish.
I know, right? Those checks still aren't showing up. And then I went to a Hillary Clinton fundraiser, and my photo was taken with Huma Abedin. And then there was another article written that speculated that I was not just George Soros's rent boy in Hollywood. I was actually dictating terms to George Soros about his media operation, and also running the Muslim Brotherhood in LA, for which I think I should have gotten a Nobel Peace Prize. And then I met with Pete Buttigieg a couple of months later, and a subsequent article speculated that I was also organizing the gays along with the Muslims and the Jews for global domination, I guess. I know, right? I mean,
solidarity.
Kind of. And that resulted in, every several thousand word essay resulted in more and more Twitter ominous harassment. And I'm always like loath to talk about it as something like truly threatening, because I know that most people deal with a lot more. But I did start getting like letters to my house. And that was definitely a moment where I was like, wait a second, not great. And I remember talking to my lawyer about it, because she represents other clients who also had dealt with similar things. And she was like, yeah, we've tried to explore what this is and figure out if there's a way to nip it in the bud, and there really isn't. Like, there's security and just kind of take additional precautions. And I was like, that's fine if you live in a gated community like your other clients who are dealing with this. I live in a one-bedroom apartment on the ground floor with a janky window. So it was stressful, but I think at the end of the day, and then sort of the punchline to all of this is, after January 6th, I was in Ireland producing a movie while my wife was there directing a different movie. I got an email from the Washington Post asking if I was interested in knowing who Neon Revolt was. Hop on the Zoom, and he's like, yeah, so basically Neon Revolt was probably one of the 5 most influential QAnon bloggers, and he's a failed screenwriter who basically blames you for him not having a career, and decided to sort of, direct the full force of QAnon to your front door. Like, he has literally been quoted as saying, if Franklin weren't, so against white men, I would have had a career in Hollywood as a screenwriter.
Oh, wow. Crazy
I mean, again,
stuff.
like crazy. Not something I expected when I just was sort of going about my normal day.
It's always very unexpected. So I just want to share a little bit of my experience. For me, I became a frequent object of derision on right-wing media after my second book, HATEMONGER, a biography of Trump's senior advisor Stephen Miller, was published. And then I started as a columnist at the LA Times. Every time that I would get brought up, like Fox News just started doing these random articles, like constantly about what I was writing, and ridiculing me about it. Tucker Carlson brought me up on his show. Breitbart did a few pieces. Every time that they would mention me, I would get a torrent of hate mail and harassment on social media. And for me, as a woman, some of the vitriol focused, and I want to get to like the role that race has played in some of the vitriol we've received. As a woman, a lot of the vitriol focused on my looks, and there was of a sexual nature, including fantasies of rape. But a lot of it focused on the fact that I'm Latina, even though I don't look like that to a lot of people. A lot of people can tell from my last name, Guerrero, and because I'm very open about my pride and my roots. And the most frequent comment was that I should be deported, that I should go back to where I came from, even though I was born in this country. But the lowest point for me was actually when One American News Network did this 12-minute segment that was attacking not just me, but my family. They took material from my first book, CRUX, a cross-border memoir, which is a very personal memoir about my relationship with my father, who struggled with mental illness. And they used material from that book to attack me and my father, and to ridicule us as mentally ill, and They even used a photo of my dad that they pulled from my social media, and multiple photos of me, and repeatedly, the host repeatedly said my name and was telling people, since you make sure you're taking notes. Her name is Jean Guerrero, her father, and giving all this information about my family. So it was a very low point. I'd prepared by deleting my information and my family's information from publicly searchable databases. So I knew that I had done everything I could to keep our family safe, but it was still very surprising and not surprising, but it was disturbing. So I wanted to ask you, can we talk about the toll that this kind of harassment takes on us as writers, psychologically, physically, emotionally? Can we start by talking about that? And how we deal with it?
Well, look, so I've had a 20-year career of being attacked by pretty much everyone. All the different groups have some reason to be unhappy with me and my work. And for most of those 20 years, I, took those attacks as a badge of honor. That I thought to myself, well, I'm doing something right then, if I'm getting this kind of response. And I also really took very seriously the role that I had kind of stepped into as a kind of mouthpiece for a way of looking at the world that I think a majority of people have, but who don't have the platform that I have in order to put that view forward in a robust way. I mean, it was sort of a joke, but like for a good while there, I basically made my living having fights on news networks. That was the kind of, what I was doing for a living. And I would tell people that it doesn't bother me. I would tell people that, it comes with the job. Or I would tell people that, bring it on, or whatever the case may be. But it was a lie. I was totally making stuff up. The truth is that it was having a serious toll on my mental health, and that I didn't even realize that it was. And especially when my family started getting into it, when the threats were starting to be focused on not me, but on my family members, and I started having these unexplained panic attacks that would sort of come out of nowhere, and all this kind of strange anxiety attacks that would happen, and I couldn't figure out why it was happening, and also some weird body issues, like my back just suddenly went out for no reason, and it took me a while to realize that this was my body telling me that this wasn't okay. That I was just kind of pretending for so many years that, I can handle all of this. I'm whatever. It doesn't bother me. And my body was reacting in what was the proper way to react to the kinds of constant, nonstop threats that I was receiving. And, if you saw our three faces back there, one of us didn't have a Twitter handle, and so in mid-November, right before Thanksgiving, I remember very clearly I was sitting in a hotel room in Miami waiting for the event to start, knowing, the people who were going to be yelling at me outside the door, and I just kind of made this decision that, that's enough. That's enough. So I deleted all of my social media accounts, and I retired from public life, is the way that I put it. And it was hard. What was hard about it was it felt like I was giving in. It felt like I was surrendering, right? That I was like, okay, well, I guess they win. And I was. Let me just be perfectly frank. I was surrendering. I mean, I did the 20 years of the work. I feel like I've done enough. It's other people. It's time for other people to do it. Yeah. But I have to be perfectly honest and say that I'm really happy and healthy and I feel good about it. And so did it work? Did the other side win? Yeah, probably, I guess. But I'm happier than I've ever been.
They got you off social media. You're still out there using your voice.
I sort of say I would push back on the idea that you've retired from public life. We're literally on a panel here right now, and I don't seriously like. Are you done writing books?
I think I'm done writing those kinds of books. I think maybe.
Yeah, but you'll still be talking about the books, and those questions will come up. I think I'm very lucky. I don't think I've dealt with one iota of what the two of you have dealt with, and I think in the case of sort of what you've dealt with, Jean, it's I think gender is definitely a big part of that, and intersectionality is an even bigger one. But I can honestly say that for me, I don't think about it that much, and when I do think about it, I'm more amused than anything else. And I think part of that is like, there are a lot of things that I think about in regards to like my day-to-day safety, right? Like, I'm still a person who checks the exits in case there's gunfire generally.
Right.
I still feel a little bit of agita every time I see a police car if I'm driving in my car as a black man in America, right? Like, these are things that are already part of my sort of day-to-day, like the computations I make to navigate my world. And so the additional threat of QAnon is just like added to the pile. And then I also know that like, even with that, I have it pretty good, right? Like, I'm not a black trans woman. I'm not at the southern border right now. And the reality is that those people have far greater everyday threats to their lives than anything that I'm gonna experience for the choice of speaking up. I think for me though, what it has crystallized is that if I'm going to endure even that additional small bit of friction in my life, it better be worth it. Like, whatever I'm saying better be worth whatever additional annoyance I have to have, right?
That's
so
a great mentality. I love that.
If I was like, working a corporate job and I was catching this for like, towing the company line, very different conversation, right? Or, well, depending on how large the check is. But, okay, if you guys are gonna be pissed about it, let me tell you the whole truth. I'll let you be mad about everything. And I think that has, it has been a forcing function to really get me to clarify exactly what I think about the world. Because if I'm gonna say it and catch hell for it, I might as well say it plain.
So true. I do worry about what these threats and just the increased hostility that we face says about where we're headed as a country. For a few years before Trump took office, I was a correspondent in Mexico, where journalists are routinely murdered with U.S. guns that are smuggled in defiance of Mexico's very strict gun laws. Last year, there was a record of 15 journalists who were murdered in Mexico. And I'm concerned that the Republican Party's emboldening and empowering of paramilitary and vigilante groups in this country is going to lead to a very bad place for truth tellers. And I just wanted to get your thoughts on reflecting on the experience of escalating hatred that you've had. What do you think that says about the direction of this country, and what can we do to, I guess, maybe hit the brakes somehow collectively?
It's not great.
Yeah, I think I have a non-traditional take on this, which is that this has always been a problem. It's just new tools, right? Like, King got shot. How many civil rights leaders got killed for speaking out? And the people who were speaking out in smaller ways either had their lives shut down because of it, and they didn't even have a chance to sort of get a large enough platform that they would have needed to be shot by the people who had power. And so I tend to think that, if you were to go back 40 years, or not even 40 years, let's say 50 years, but even like 25 years ago, I don't know that any of the three of us would have had the platforms that we had to say the things that we did. And if we had started saying the things that we do, there's no way we could have earned our way in the traditional sort of corporate media system that existed, or sort of in the traditional power structure that would allow us to be enough of a threat that we would have needed to be moved off the stage. So I tend to think that, like, because we have all these tools that allow voices from outside the traditional sort of dialogic norms to become influential, the sort of dominant power structure needs new tools to remove them from the stage. And so, you know, it may be social media threats, it may be troll farms, it may be letters to your house. That's not that different from a cross burning in your front yard, you know, or not being able to get hired in a town in the South because you started saying, I don't know, I feel like everybody should be able to vote. You know, but now I can't get a job and my family can't eat, so maybe I'm just going to stay quiet. I think those things have just changed, and that we live in a world now where there's a real threat to the dominant power structure because there's a way for those voices to be amplified and shared that didn't exist previously, that was outside of the control of sort of the means of production that existed before. And so they have to, you know, there have to be new means of suppressing those voices.
That's a great point. Reza, do you have any?
Well, I would just say, I think that's absolutely correct, and there's no question that these platforms have elevated voices that need to be elevated, and would not have the opportunity to be heard otherwise. But at the same time, they've also elevated the voices of individuals who, have these fringe views that would otherwise have no real audience, but now, because the movement from social media to mainstream media is so fluid that, you know, that kid, that, you know, the failed screenwriter can put a piece of disinformation out in the world that then very quickly gets picked up by what should be legitimate and trusted media sources. And I think that's new. Like, you're absolutely right. The threats have always been there. But, you know, to be blunt, it's a lot of work to go and burn a cross on someone's lawn. Like, that's some, you know, you got to, like, get your friends together. You got to get a truck.
They got Ubered for it now,
Exactly.
basically. You just go online.
You just go online and you just push a button, and then there's the cross, you know. And I think that's dangerous. But I also think the issue of disinformation is also something that I don't know if we are ready to deal with yet. And that, I think, is just going to get worse with deep fakes. Mm-hmm. Because, again, I don't think either of us, nobody on this stage is going to complain about negative and even threatening reactions to our work and to our words. We know what we do.
Yeah.
We know the consequences of it. We could have done other things. We chose to do this. And, like, if you didn't know you were going to get threatened for the kind of work that we do, then, you know, there's something wrong with you. I don't have a problem with the threats that come to me for the things that I've done and said. But I don't know how to respond to the threats that come to me for things I've never done or said. Mm-hmm. And especially now, because technology and these social media platforms are such that it is, first of all, almost impossible to tell the difference between, you know, a real thing and a fake thing. And secondly, no amount of fact-checking fixes the fake thing. So I don't know how to deal with that. I don't know how to respond to that, and I'm pretty sure it's going to get worse.
I would argue, though, that it's a continuation with new tools, right? Like disinformation. I mean, we just got that, was it the Washington Post story this week about Alex Haley's recounting of King's comments on Malcolm X, right? And the way in which you can sort of push perceptions of people in the public eye and alter them so that they can become sort of objects of derision and attack. I think that's been true for as long as there's been a need to suppress alternative voices. I just think, like you said, the tools to spread those lies globally with the stroke of the key has made it a far greater threat than, you know, again, it requires a lot more effort to, like, you know, manipulate a legendary journalist, force him to publish an article, and then amplify that story, or any of the number of other things that, like, you know, COINTELPRO might have done. The spreading is just easier
so
now.
In the midst of this whole thing, I had my cousins in Iran contact me and say, "How could you support this regime?" And I was like, "You're my family. Like, how could you?" Like, and for them, it's like, well, but we heard it from, you know, trustworthy sources. And I don't know. That's
Well, I think the other issue is that we have a media culture now that kind of launders a lot of these things as
Exactly.
both
The
sides,
reporting the story,
right? And that's, I think, incredibly dangerous when journalists sort of step aside from, is this true or not? And if it's true, we talk about it. And if it's not true, we say so directly. And I feel like they've sort of they've ceded that as a primary focus.
Yeah, so for me, the line between disinformation and then people reacting directly to things that I'm saying based on completely distorted views of what I'm saying actually means, it's a very blurry line because of the fact that you have well, Tucker Carlson's not at Fox News anymore, but you've got so many propagandists like him who are spewing the Great Replacement theory, just these ideas that, oh, if you are in favor of human rights being respected at the border, that means that you want to replace white people. Yeah. So it's just this complete distortion of what things mean that I think is just so concerning and undeniably, like, for me, it's not just that the tools have changed. It's also because the tools have changed. There's undeniably like more polarization than we've ever experienced, where a majority of Americans now see other Americans as the #1 threat to their way of life. And I'm like, where does that end? How do we as writers, how do we help each other to get our way out of that?
So I struggle with this polarization argument too, because I feel like, yes, there is a significant percentage of Americans who see other Americans as a primary threat to their way of life, but we know for a fact that white supremacy is the #1 domestic terror threat in the US. So like, it is a fact that other Americans are a direct threat to my way of life as an American. It is not a fact that my way of life is a threat to theirs, right? And if you don't believe me, believe Trump-appointed FBI Director Christopher Wray. So again, I think that there's like, it's not as simple as polarization. It is one community that has had the benefit of controlling most power structures in this country, terrified about losing control of those power structures, and lashing out as a consequence. You know, I don't see a lot of folks who are not white supremacists saying, oh my God, they're trying to take the country from us, right? That's not, you know, we're not worried about white people replacing us. We just would like to be able to live peaceably with everybody else.
Yeah, and I'll just add to this too, because we decry the polarization of this country often, and I'm not sure what's so wrong with polarization. I really don't understand what the issue is. I have fair sense of moral clarity, and if the person on the other side of the aisle doesn't even understand my dignity as a human being, I'm perfectly fine being in a different camp. Like, I want polarization. I don't want to be in the same boat or camp as that person. I'm perfectly happy with the polarization in this country.
Like, we were more polarized in the 60s and 70s.
Yeah.
We were more polarized in the 1860s. Like, this is not the most polarized America's ever been. I think it's just the most polarized period in recent memory. And that's in part because, you know, there's been this arguably almost 50-year project by the Republican Party to, you know, otherize most Americans and deem them a threat so that they could preserve the political power that they thought was rightfully theirs.
And you've distinguished previously, Franklin, between the silencing and intimidation that journalists and storytellers like ourselves have experienced from what the GOP likes to call cancel culture. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, I just don't think cancel culture exists. I think that there have always been consequences from speaking up. And if your views run counter to the views of a large community, there will be consequences that you have to deal with. We all knew that when we went into the lines of work that we did. You don't hear us complaining about being canceled. You say, hey, all of us are like, yeah, not ideal. This is how we navigate it. I think cancel culture is, people who for most of their lives have never had to give a second thought to what they say because they didn't realize there would be consequences, being confronted with the fact that for the first time ever, there are people that can organize online and say, hey, not cool. Maybe you shouldn't say that. And they don't like the fact that those people can organize online to force them to reconsider what they say or that there are consequences for what they say. It's kind of just that simple. And I would be a lot more willing to sort of take people seriously in their, no, it's about free speech argument if they had any record prior to this moment of advocating for the free speech of Black trans women, Black women. Where were you when Nicole Hannah-Jones didn't get her tenured professorship because an Arkansas newspaper guy made a phone call to say, I don't know, maybe don't give her the job because she wrote the 1619 Project. That's a suppression of free speech. What's happening in Florida with books is a suppression of free speech. You being criticized because you said something that was, at a minimum, obliquely white supremacist is not cancel culture. It's you having to own what you said publicly and the fact that, guess what? Not everybody agrees with you. And there are consequences for that sometimes.
Absolutely.
And by the way, if you're scared of cancel culture and you're like, I can't say what I believe because there's cancel culture, guess what? You're a coward, period. Because a lot of people endure a lot worse to say the truth, and they still say it. So, you want to be racist, and there's a cancel culture, be racist. Make your argument. Let's have the debate. But if you're not willing to say it, I don't believe that you even stand by the courage of your convictions. Period. It's just that you're mad that white supremacy now is not okay without criticism.
That there's some consequence to it, yeah.
It's oh, I can't be a white supremacist anymore, and people take my job.
As the one person on the stage who has been canceled for saying something, yeah, there's no such thing as cancel culture. It's a nonsense thing. I don't have a First Amendment right to have a show on CNN. Okay? You don't have a First Amendment right to have a talk show on Fox. Right? I mean, if you say odious things or things that come with political ramifications and consequences, and you're shocked because you actually have to deal with the consequences, that's not cancel culture. That's just suddenly you are now responsible for your words.
Yeah. Can you share with the audience in case people aren't familiar with the...
Yes, I used to have a very successful show on CNN, and then I called President Trump a piece of shit. And then I lost
that. Was it. That was,
and I lost it very quickly. And the problem is I did it too early.
I was going to say history vindicated you.
Yeah. See, I was too trailblazing. I called him that, and it was I think it was June of 20. As Phil Griffin, the president of MSNBC, said to my face, if I said it in June of 2017, and he said, if you just waited till August, because that would have been post Charlottesville. So if you just waited 6 more weeks, then you could have called him whatever you wanted to call him.
But I think this goes to a really interesting point, though, right? Which is, what is the standard for inappropriate speech? We talk all the time that oh, this is supposed to be a country where free speech is allowed. We all know that there is speech that's not okay, right? There are news networks right now that are saying don't stay in your silo. It's well, there are things that they're definitely not going to put on that network. Even Fox has things that they would never put on their network. So we agree that there is a line somewhere. The question is, who controls where that line is and what is that line? Because prior to July 2017, Trump had said a lot of things that I think would have earned him that title. Charlottesville shouldn't have been confirmation for anybody. It was an ongoing trend of things that he had said going back 30 years, vis-a-vis race and other things, that should have been, yeah, that's a one legitimate opinion about the man. We may not agree, but you have a right to say it.
Yeah, I mean...
By the way, I also want to say, I handled it. They said, oh, well, we're going to cancel your show. And I thought, well, that stinks, but I don't have a First Amendment right to this show. It's not, you're not stepping on my First Amendment right. Like,
You should have hit Fox News and hit the grift.
I know, I really should have.
The other thing is about cancel culture, like there's a grift behind it, right? There's nothing more lucrative right now in quote unquote centrist and right-wing spaces than having been canceled. So if you can like manufacture a way to even like the faintest claim of I've been canceled, like you got a couple $100,000 in a Substack newsletter coming your way.
And I think we have a little bit of time. Do we have audience questions? I'm supposed to, okay. Yes. Okay. Oh, okay. Oh, okay, great.
Because I know you're moderating, but you should be also involved in these questions since they pertain to what has gone on with you as well. So, yeah, we have a bunch. Some cross over each other, but I'll start here. It has been shocking to follow the growth and popularity of self-proclaimed sexists and chauvinists like Andrew Tate, specifically among young boys here in the U.S. How can we as a society defeat this? Because if we don't, harassment of women could very much intensify and have huge impacts on female creatives. Let's begin with any of you, yeah.
Well, I guess I'll just share the first thing that came into my mind, because I think it's going to be very complicated to defeat this. I think there's many ways to counter it, but I think part of it is going to just depend on how we raise our boys, because I just think of my dad who, when he was a little boy, he used to ask his mom for a doll, because he used to see his neighbors, the little girls playing with dolls and caressing them, and he wanted to feel that kind of affection as well. And he asked his mom for a doll, and my grandmother was horrified because it violated all of the codes of machismo in Mexico, and she was like, oh no, and she treated it like a monstrous request. And he still remembers it to this day, the shame that he felt for wanting to give affection to something and express love. And the way that he learned to be a man was to deny and suppress those feelings. And I think that's so true of unfortunately, it's still true of too many families, that we raise children in these different ways based on what we perceive their gender to be. And I think that manifests as mental illness that, I hesitate to call it mental illness because I hate this like demonization of mental illness. Every time there's like a mass shooting or something. The real illness is patriarchy and the way that we instill toxic masculinity in our children, and racism and all of these diseases in society. And I think it really like comes down to just allowing children to be equally loved and expressive of love.
Yeah, I was gonna say also just men gotta step up. Like, this stuff is like so utterly repugnant on like every level that like I have a really hard time processing its existence. But like, you can't, as a man in this world, when you see it in any place, like you gotta call it out. And I think it's particularly important in all male spaces, right? Where like, sort of quote unquote locker room conversation and whatever, like you just can't let that stuff stand. And I think that like it requires sort of everyone who's on board for that to just do it consistently in every place where they are. And frankly, men have to take the responsibility to do it. Like, this is not a problem for women to solve. This is a problem of men's creation that has victims who are also men, but like, I don't know what the answer is, but we're the ones who have to solve it.
Here's another one. AI is developing at the speed of a runway train. The implications of empowering hate groups with the ability to automate and catalyze their harassment with these technologies is daunting. What can we do now to prepare and protect tomorrow's writers today?
Well, we're trying that right now. That's what a huge part of the WGA strike, which is affecting so many of us, not just writers, but so many people in this city. has a lot to do, not just with fair wages, but it also has to do with the imposition of AI in the creative process. So that's part of it. I think that's a huge part of what we're fighting for. I think that built into the AI system is the problem itself. I mean, again, we were just having this conversation backstage. We should probably stop talking about ChatGPT and these things as AI, because it's not really artificial intelligence. It's just a very sophisticated language generator. That's all it is. And it just scrapes, the internet for language. And that's sophisticated, but that's not intelligence. And what the internet is a cesspool of racism and sexism and misogyny. So I don't know why we're all so surprised that ChatGPT keeps churning out all this racist, sexist, and misogynist stuff. Of course it is. Its source code is built in racism and sexism and misogyny. So I don't know. I'm not as sanguine about the opportunities and possibilities of what we are, I think, falsely referring to as AI right now than other people. I know you've got a little bit of a different view of this.
With that question, there's a very dark part of me that's like, what would AI-aided hate speech look like? And I'm scared.
Just ask.
Well,
ask it.
Well, I actually think it would probably be more sophisticated than most of the hate speech that I get sent to my email address, and it would definitely be better punctuated. These are tools, right? And I think they can be used for good and they can be used for evil. And I think the problem is with a lot of these tools, particularly that accelerate with exponential sort of change and growth, like the internet did and like AI, however you want to describe it, inevitably will, there's no putting the genie back in the bottle. I think that any sort of attempt at oh, well, in the US we have these rules. It's like, great, does Russia have those rules? That stuff's gonna permeate borders regardless. So I think I am hopeful that the non-hate folks are smarter and more savvy with the tools than the hateful people are. And I think you have to have that practiced optimism to believe that the arc of the universe bends towards justice. But looking at the arc of history, we've all had access to the same tools, and I think trajectory-wise we're winning. And I think we'll probably continue to.
And I think it's going to take some regulations on the tech companies as well. Not necessarily.
Yes, absolutely.
Because there's just such an imbalance as far as what all of these companies know about us and the data that they're able to collect about us in order to manipulate us in ways that they know we'll be vulnerable to. And the more that we have that imbalance of power, the more society is going to be vulnerable to any kind of disinformation or manipulation. And I don't see enough politicians talking about regulating the collection of that data. And there have been some proposals by Jaron Lanier, for example, who is a VR guy, one of the founders of virtual reality, who says we should put a value on our data. We should be getting paid for the information that we put on social media that is being monetized by these companies. Then there will be more of a balance of power as far as how that data is used. And yeah.
This is sort of off that tangent, but I'm going to sort of combine these two questions because they're very much the same. Seen as these harassments normally start via social media, what responsibility do you think that media companies and the government have to shut down misinformation, hate speech, and track the users that spread it?
I don't think there's any reason for a corporation to do anything unless it's forced to do it. I think that's true certainly of the media. And we talked a little bit about not just social media, but just the problem with, the so-called mainstream media in amplifying these voices in the guise of reporting on the debate or reporting on the controversy. Because it's hard to blame them for doing that. We can say, oh, well, that's terrible, it's bad journalism, et cetera, et cetera. But these are all multinational corporations as big as Fox News is, it's a line item for a massive multinational corporation, right? I mean, CNN, whatever, it's not that big anymore anyway, but it's nothing more than a line, and not a great line item either. It's not even actually a very profitable line item for a massive corporation. It's just kind of one little tiny section of it. So the idea that these massive corporations are concerned with the spread of proper information, the sort of responsible journalism, et cetera, and that we expect it to be responsible for that kind of thing is sort of silly. I mean, it's really ridiculous. They have one concern and one concern only, and that is making money for shareholders. And by the way, that's not a moral judgment. That's literally what they're supposed to be doing. That's legally, actually. Legally, what they are obligated to do is make money for their shareholders, not monitor, disinformation. Like, that's not their job. So, I think it's baked into the system itself that it's incapable of policing itself. And so the only force that can police it is government. And so this idea that we're creating a nanny state by having the government, regulate hate speech or disinformation. There is no other means to do so.
It's also the government has always done that.
Right, exactly. This is not new.
It's not like if you go back to antiquity, if you were in the town square shouting hate speech, the government would have rolled up, right? It's just the places that we do it are different now. And these are vital requirements for a viable state, period.
All right, we've got 3 here. Should we do 2 more? Let's do 2 more. Ari, cancel culture. So far, as you've only focused on extreme political cases of canceling, what about the kids who get acceptance from college rescinded because of an old video or picture resurfacing? Cancel culture has a very absolute nature that is unforgiving of past mistakes.
Yeah, if you get accepted to college on the pretense that you are a good person who will be a added value to your university's student body, and they discover additional information that you decided to hop on video and say the N-word a bunch of times, they might reconsider whether you would be an additive part of the student body. Guess what? There are other schools that you can go to, and maybe when you reapply as a transfer student the following year, you can write an essay about what you've learned. Again, you don't have a right to go to those schools.
To go to that school.
Yeah.
You have a right to say what you want and accept the consequences that come with it. But the idea that these utterances on these videos are to be ignored and that they should have no consequences is, again, goes back to that same thing. I have yet to see anybody jump to the defense of a young black student who, had any number of other things go into their sort of application process, and they say, oh, well, actually, he should get special consideration. These stories are only, oh no, the white kid who jumped on social media and said something awful that, if I was their fellow student, I don't know that I want to be their roommate. So maybe teach your kids not to do things like that. And if you don't, there will be consequences when they do. They can go to a different school. Life works out fine if you don't go to Harvard.
Definitely.
I mean,
Possibly better.
Okay, this is a good one to end with. Has your experience with online harassment furthered your resolve, and this goes to all of you, furthered your resolve to write or to speak out, or do you find yourself more cautious or less willing to take risks?
Well, so I kind of confessed that, for 20 years it made me more willing to speak out. But I'm an old man now, and I have multiple children.
In the audience.
I'd like to pretend that no, I'm exactly who I was when I was 41. You know, bring it. I'll fight you, you know, on TV. I'll fight you in the public square. I'll fight you anywhere. Now it's starting to affect my children, and that's changed the calculus. And again, I'm still dealing with what that says about me and what that means. I get it, and I've had many people come up to me and say, like, where are you? Why aren't you talking about this? Why aren't you doing this? Why aren't you? And I have to say, yeah, I just don't do that anymore. And I get it. I see why it's disappointing to other people. But I'm just in a different place in this world now. So I don't know. Maybe I'm the wrong person to answer this question.
No, I mean, I think I'm 44. I don't have any kids yet, but I think I'm on the same journey that you, like the trajectory that you were on. Like, I think it's very easy for me to say right now that it steals my resolve. You know, I was on CNN Tonight last week, and by the time I'd gotten off the air, I had 3 different emails in my inbox from people who'd call me the N-word. I assume Tucker Carlson just didn't have anything to do that night because he didn't have a job anymore. I like to imagine him at home just being like so angry. But, and again, my coping mechanism is first comedy. Like, I immediately default to finding it amusing. But I think if I had kids, I think it'd be different. And that I know it would be different. There's just no scenario where other people have to bear the cost of my behavior that I'm comfortable with doing it. I think what changes, though, is not that you stop doing it, despite Reza's protestations. I think you shift your strategy. And I think that that's kind of what we all have to do in the world generally, is like, the world is constantly changing. The threats that exist to us are constantly changing. And, you know, for us to be survivors amidst all of this, our strategies have to constantly change so that we can be effective at the goal that we want to accomplish. I'm not talking mess on the internet because I want the attention. I'm talking about it because I want to not feel the need to talk about it anymore, right? Like, I'm hoping that by talking about it, someone will fix it so that I can all focus on other things like random soccer games. And so I think, you know, your strategies shift based on what your liabilities are and what your assets are and sort of how the world exists. And I think that that's the other part of this is constantly being honest with yourself about, is this the best strategy to accomplish my goal, or am I being motivated by something else? And I don't think any of us ever get it right all the time, but I think that has to be part of the internal dialogue at all times if you have any hope of getting it right some of the time.
Yeah, I totally agree with both of you. I don't have kids, but I did feel because I'd written this very personal book about my family. I did feel, and I still feel like I'm exposing my family every time. Not every time, but sometimes when I write certain columns, and when I get the harassment, I do feel. I've spoken before about how I feel like it's a tax on my body. Like, I've actually gotten sick with recurring autoimmune issues since this all started, and I can't like prove that it's connected, but I do feel a connection. And for me, the one thing that's really been helpful is, first of all, community, reaching out in solidarity with other writers who are experiencing this kind of harassment, but also just getting offline, like you mentioned, Reza, and just spending a lot more time outside. I've picked up longboarding, I've picked up hot yoga, just like I just spend way more time experiencing my body off of screens, and it's huge, and it gives me the strength and, yeah, just the resilience to be able to stay in the fight.
Thank you. Thank you all so much for being here. It was a really informative and terrific discussion. And I want to thank all of you for being inside on this sunny day, and thank Allison for bringing this World Festival to us, and thank Penn for co-hosting this. And I'm going to give it over to you.
Thank you. Thank you. Can we give a... So one of the reasons why this was an important conversation for us to have as part of the PEN World Voices Festival was because PEN is so deeply committed to providing resources and support to writers like all of you who have and continue to face online harassment. So in case there are those of you in the audience or those of you watching at home that are in this situation, I wanted to be sure to share a screen. We should have a slide available of the resources that PEN America has available to writers and artists and journalists who are facing online harassment. Can we get that up on the screen? Nope. That's just good stuff. But I do thank you for joining us today and being a part of the World Voices Festival. It was back a couple of slides, like around slide 6, I think. No. No. Sorry. Nope. But that too. I think we're all feeling that. Let's just keep going. There we go. Nope. 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 No. It's okay. This is the technical difficulty that we face without online harassment. Imagine what happens when they come after us. So let's see if we can get that up there. But I do just want to say that we provide resources and trainings so that writers know how to defend themselves. I think, Jean, for you, that was part of the advice that we gave you in terms of how to take all of your public information offline, correct?
Yeah, that was hugely helpful. Before HATEMONGER came out, PEN America provided me with all kinds of resources as far as, knowing about Delete Me, which is a service that helps get yourself and your family members off of publicly searchable databases, and then also protecting cybersecurity.
Right. Yep. So, and we work with newsrooms across the country to provide training for journalists so that they know how to protect themselves. If you are interested, you can contact PEN America to organize one of those trainings. We also conduct research and we advocate on behalf of writers and journalists to hold social media companies accountable for their online harms. And we also run a series of free expression programs to educate the next generation of activists and advocates, since, as you said, Reza, you're getting too old for this, right? So this summer, from June 26th through the 30th, we'll be hosting a Free Expression Advocacy Institute in partnership with ASU at their campus right here in downtown LA for high school and college students. The program is free and applications are still being accepted. If you're interested, we have someone at the information table who can tell you more about that. This marks the official end. Oh, and there we go, just in time. So you can QR code it to get all the online information that you need. Thank you. But this marks the end of our 2023 World Voices Festival. PEN America and Aloud offers year-round programming, so please be on the lookout for the next series of events. And thank you again to the Library Foundation of Los Angeles and Aloud for helping us make today's event possible. Books are available for purchase and will be signed in the lobby courtesy of the library store. Have a wonderful afternoon and thank you.